All right, it's 7:05, so we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Linda. I'm an analyst with the Water Conservation Program here at the City of Milpitas. And excited to have you all here for our Transitioning to a Winter Water Efficient Edible Garden webinar. So just a couple, I know we've all gotten pretty comfortable with Zoom, but just a couple moderation instructions is that we are going to pause for questions, and during the presentation, the best way to ask your question is to put it in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand at the end of Loretta's presentation and ask her question. We can unmute you so you can ask questions directly. Please try not to use the chat for questions for us to better be able to make sure that we see it in the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the BOSCA website.
So we got the, just keep going, Loretta. There it is.
You can see the Q&A and raise hand.
There we go.
So a little bit of background about BOSCA. So BOSCA represents 26 agencies, including cities, water districts, a water company, and a university. The member BOSCA provides water to 1.8 million people. And BOSCA's goal is really high quality supply of water at a fair price. So part of BOSCA's landscape program objectives is that really outdoor water use is the single largest opportunity for water conservation in the area. By using water efficient plants and innovative irrigation systems, we all really can conserve water and help us get through this drought and future droughts. So for BOSCA member agencies, there are different rebates available, but please look up to see what your retailer provides. But BOSCA does have a lawn conversion program called Lawn Be Gone, which you get paid $1 to $4 per square foot of lawn that is replaced with drought tolerant plants. They also offer rain barrels for $200 rebate. BOSCA also has a smart irrigation controller program with Rachio, and they also have added in some rainwater harvesting through a rain garden rebate program. Like I said, you can go to bayareaconservation.org and look up to see what your utility participates in. Now, if you live in Milpitas, we work with Valley Water for our landscape rebate program. So in Milpitas, there's the landscape conversion rebate where you take out your lawn and put in drought tolerant plants, and you get up to $3 per square foot. We also do the smart irrigation equipment upgrades, including drip irrigation, and we have rain barrel rebates as well. Just noting that we are working with Valley Water to further increase these rebate amounts, so stay tuned for that. And you can learn more at savewatermilpitas.org. Valley Water also offers a variety of resources on their webpage, a lot of short videos about how to look at your irrigation system, how to maintain your landscape. So definitely you can check out watersavings.org for Valley Water's webpage on a great host of videos. Great. Well, we're super excited to have you here tonight, and we hope that you'll join us for future classes. You can see a lot of upcoming webinars. We actually at Milpitas will be hosting the drip irrigation for beginners on November 15th, so hope to see you there. And great. I'm gonna super excited to have Loretta with us. Loretta has been an avid gardener for most of her life, and has grown up with vegetable gardens. She is the co-founder and garden manager of Pacifica Gardens, a community-run urban farm on the San Mateo coast. Her training includes permaculture design and bio-intensive mini farming, and we're super excited to have her expertise with us tonight. Loretta, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you. I'm going to just stop my video here. So there we go. So we have nice internet. So great. So tonight we're going to talk about how we can transition our edible gardens into a garden that is water efficient for the fall and winter, and yet will also help provide us with some food. Okay, so that we can have vegetables throughout the fall and the winter. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of review of water conservation principles in our edible garden, and then the things that we need to do to prepare for that garden. And then we'll talk a little bit about the crops that grow well in the fall. And then I want to introduce, if we have some time, the idea of cover crops for water conservation and then also for soil health. Okay, so things that we probably have already become used to, especially now during a drought. And if you're a gardener right now, you've already kind of got this idea that we really want to avoid use overhead sprinklers. This idea of, throwing water up in the air is, it adds to evaporation and waste of water. And so we recommend either doing a hand watering system where you get really close to the soil and avoid kind of water sprinkling everywhere, or use a drip irrigation system. I like the idea of using the combination of the two. So I'm the garden manager at Pacifica Gardens, and it's a pretty good size garden. It's about 3/4 of an acre. We have lots of beds. So we actually do a drip irrigation for as many of the beds as we possibly can. And then we'll water by hand as necessary for certain crops that require a little bit more water. We recommend that you use organic mulch whenever possible over the soil. We want to make sure that we keep the soil covered and add compost. I'm a big compost advocate, not only of making your own compost, but then adding compost. The compost is really going to be one of the primary ways in which you can improve your soil, but then also to save water. Water only the plants when they need it, and that takes a little bit of trial and error. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm just going to water it 3 times a week no matter what, or I'm going to water every day. That you might be overwatering your plants, and then you may also be underwatering depending on the plant and the time of the year. We recommend that we water slowly so that the water can actually seep into the soil. We want to avoid runoff, and also too, obviously with that comes erosion. So sometimes we think, well, how else can we save water? Some of the things that we can do in the vegetable garden is optimize the bed spacing. So most of us probably have raised beds, or some kind of a raised bed, or a garden bed that is marked off with stakes or a little fence, or maybe even raised up with bricks or lumber, or that kind of thing. If we optimize the in-bed spacing of the plants, what we can do is avoid evaporation. So in particular, this is a great little image here where if we plant things sort of on a hexagonal way, when the plant grows up, we're going to see that the plants are kind of barely touching each other. What that does is a couple of things. One, it helps reduce the amount of weeds, which of course we'd love to have that. It's going to protect the soil, but then it's also going to avoid and prevent a lot of evaporation. I like to recommend that people flat their seeds beforehand. It's a little bit late in the season to start flatting right now, but you can certainly find seedlings to transplant. When we put seeds, rows of seeds, into a garden bed outside and then water it, we actually do waste quite a bit of water. But if we transplant, if we grow up seeds in a smaller flat and then we plant them into the garden bed, we're going to eventually save water. It's a good idea to plant the veggies that are going to have a high water need, or have it together. So if we have similar plants with similar water requirements planted together, then that particular area will be the best. Actually, you'll be able to be as efficient as possible. Weed regularly. And I know that especially when it starts raining and it's cold and we're outside, oh, who wants to weed? But weeding really helps prevent competition for water on one hand. And it also to prevents the weeds from, crowding your vegetables. Fertilizing is usually going to be a component, but we don't want to over fertilize. If we over fertilize, we actually end up with plants that are growing really fast, and they tend to use a little bit more water. And then also too, with that, they tend to unfortunately become a little bit more pest prone. And of course, if you can, install a rain barrel and make use of your free water. It may not be enough for your vegetable garden, but it will definitely help. So the things we want to consider for a fall vegetable garden is how much of your current garden do you want to dedicate to your fall winter crops? So I usually dedicated about half of mine. And that's simply because I know that I'm going to spend less time gardening, even though I garden year round. The holidays are coming, it's cold, I have less light in my garden, less sun, and the days are shorter. So I usually take about half, but you kind of need to choose for yourself. And then again, consider the time that you're willing to dedicate to your garden. And if this is your first fall garden, then start small. It's much better to be successful with a small garden at first than to feel overwhelmed and not be successful if you plant your entire garden. And then also too, crop selection is going to be important. So plant the crops that you want to grow, plant what you want to eat. That's pretty much the thing that we recommend fall or summer. Yeah. So if there are areas of your garden that you're not going to plant in vegetable crops for the fall winter, that area, I'd recommend that you plant a cover crop of some kind. So any beds that are left unplanted, keep them weeded and mulched or covered with a shade net. My first choice would be plant the cover crops, and if you can't do that, then go ahead and make sure that you keep it covered. Make your compost with your summer crop residue, grass clippings, leaves, corn stalks, etc. And this is where we like to recommend turning off an automatic watering system. So if you have something timed right now that's going to come on, sometimes what you want to turn it off when the rains come. You really don't want to have your irrigation system and rain at the same time. It just becomes a waste of water. Take a look at the day length. Day length is going to be important. Okay, so in the Bay Area, the day length in December is still about 9 hours, which is pretty good, but it might not be enough sun depending on what is in the way. So for instance, my southwest side of my garden in the wintertime becomes obstructed by my neighbor's tree. Okay, so these are the things that you have to take into consideration. So I have less sun in my garden in the wintertime than I do in the summer, spring and summer. Okay, all right. So again, we want to make sure that we find the sunniest location. So some things that we need to know. So fruiting vegetables like peas and beans, they're going to require about 6 hours of full sunlight every day. It's a little bit late right now to plant peas and beans, but certainly next year. So I usually like to get the fall planting of the beans in August, and the peas in September. You might want to try peas if it's still warm, but over in the next couple of weeks. But the day length is going to limit the amount of growth. So root vegetables are going to require about 4 to 6 hours. So our root vegetables are carrots and beets. The cool weather crops and the leaf vegetables are going to need about 4 hours of sunlight per day. So, and many of them like lettuce and spinach are going to do fairly well in partially shaded areas. So the other thing that we want to consider is the daytime high and the overnight low. So it sounds to me like we're still in the 70s. It was 70 in San Mateo today. I think it was 70 in Milpitas today, and the overnight low is like in the 40s, which is actually great gardening weather for the fall. But things will start to get cooler. Okay, so now's the time to get things in. The sooner you get them in, the better off they're going to be for the later in the fall and in the winter. Okay, so I just pretty much talked about that. So some of the things we really, late August, early September is going to be the best time. Again, there are some things like the kales and spinaches that we can get in right now. Plants will do better in the colder weather if they've had an opportunity to if they've had an opportunity to be in the soil for a while. Okay, so if you get them in while it's still warm and it gets, and they have a chance to establish themselves, so you're obviously going to do better in the wintertime. Just so we know, and we aren't shocked by the fact that fall veggies tend to grow a little bit smaller and grow a little bit more slowly in the cooler weather. So for instance, in the summertime, I plant lettuces like, 12 inches apart. In the fall, I plant them 9 inches apart because I know that they're not going to get as big. So your planting strategy right now should be, if you're going to use any root crops like carrots, they tend to do better if you direct sow them. Peas and beans should be flatted or direct sowed in late August, so that's a little bit late right now. And if you're going to flat, as in germinate on your own, do the lettuce, kale, chard right now, or probably about now, it's best to look for these seedlings in a reliable nursery. You can get a lot of organic lettuces and spinach and chard and kales as organic seedlings, which will be great to transplant. The garden bed preparation for the fall is kind of minimal. If you've had a summer garden, you're going to clear that bed, and then you're going to obviously remove all the crop debris, loosen your soil to about 12 inches. Don't turn it. You just really want to just kind of loosen it a little bit, and then apply about a ½ inch to 1 inch of good quality compost, and then just kind of rake it in a little bit to the top 4 inches. So hopefully if you have a garden right now, your garden preparation for the fall is going to be minimal. For some of our heavy feeding crops like broccoli and cabbage, it's a good idea to apply an organic fertilizer according to the directions. I usually like to use alfalfa meal or kelp for the heavy feeders. Legumes like your peas and beans, lettuces, and other leaf crops usually don't need additional fertilizer if the bed was fertilized in the spring. Okay. Again, we want to make sure that we don't over fertilize, right? We don't want fast growing, giant water consuming plants. So have plenty of mulch on hand. So making sure that the mulch that you acquire is free from pesticides and herbicides. You can gather or purchase them. Straw is great. Rice straw is the best. Leaves, if you are in an area where you have access to lovely maple leaves or other deciduous trees that are turning all different kinds of shades of orange and red, save those because you can use them for mulch. Also, pine needles will make a good mulch too, and you can purchase coconut coir if you can't find any other mulch products. Okay, so let's take a look at the things that are going to grow really well in the fall. When we say cool weather crops, we're looking at leaf crops like the brassica. So that's going to be your cabbage, your kale. Let's see. I already said cabbage. Okay, the root crops and herbs. Okay, so all of those are going to be really good for your fall garden. The beans and the peas and the fava beans. Fava beans grow very well. Sometimes it's a little bit late now. Maybe you would try it next year, but some fast growing cool weather varieties of zucchini and cucumber sometimes can be grown in the fall garden if you plant them early. So you want to really get those in August. If you want a continual harvest of leaf crops, so I recommend chard and kale, collards and lettuce, arugula, mustard greens are all great. That you'll have a continuous a harvest. Spinach is a good choice as well, but it doesn't actually last as long as your chard and the other lettuces and kales. So you can do succession planting of the faster growing crops like lettuce. So plant lettuce now, get some lettuce growing. You can actually have multiple crops of lettuce throughout your throughout the late fall and maybe even the early winter, depending on the weather. So leaf crops are going to require less sunlight and they can tolerate some shade. So for instance, me, I have that south facing issue. I have my lettuce in an area where they're really only going to get maybe 4 hours of sunlight a day, and then they'll take some shade. So that actually is a great crop. Arugula is also a good one. Arugula can take a little shade. In fact, I actually, most often I do keep my arugula covered because if it gets too much sun, it actually becomes a little bit bitter. So those are great salad crops. And there's nothing like a, arugula salad, in November. Chard and spinach may need a little bit of a row cover in the early fall, especially if it's still warm. One of the things about chard and spinach, that beet family, so chard, spinach, and beets, is that they're susceptible to leaf miner. So if you don't know what leaf miner is, you can look it up. It produces this, the larvae of the little fly gets in the leaf and it actually makes the leaf look burned, and it's not edible at that point. So I recommend, and I do this on a regular basis, this is row cover. So if you're in a warm climate right now and you can see that it's going to be 70 degrees for the rest of November, hopefully not. But I usually cover the crops with the row cover until we start having those cooler evenings. We're down in the 40s. Okay. So chard overwinters very well. And like I said, spinach has a tendency to have a shorter lifespan, but if you get chard plants established right now, you're going to have chard for the entire winter. They're awesome. Kale, there are several varieties of kale. There's curly kale, there's dino kale, there's red Russian. Kale is for the most part very pest resistant, and it overwinters pretty well. Collard greens are another one. They're also part of the brassica family. Collard greens are very, very nutritious, and you can lots of different ways to cook them. You don't have to cook them to death, but I like to just slice them up and put them in salads or just lightly saute them. Very, very nutritious and also very pest resistant. So your other brassica, your broccoli, your guylon, cabbage, and cauliflower, these are what I call the single harvest brassica. And so they do very well in the cool weather, but they're a little bit less water wise and they're a little bit more pest prone. And the reason is because they're just producing a single, right? We're just producing a single crop or harvest. I will say one thing about cabbages. Cabbages, they store really well. So even if you do decide, oh, I just really, really want cabbage, go ahead and plant a cabbage or two and they'll store for several weeks quite well. All the brassica, just so you know, they are prone to something called the cabbage looper, cabbage worm, and sometimes aphids in the warmer months. So again, I like to use a little bit of shade net for those just to make sure. Again, if you have nice healthy soil, good compost, and enough, and get your fertilizer in there in time, you should have less of a challenge with the bugs. I want to just recommend one type of broccoli, and that is, this is a variety that I like. It's called Dicicchio. There are other varieties, but it produces a very small head, a central head. Once the central head is cut, then it's going to produce a lot of side shoots. In that regard, this type of broccoli becomes a continuous harvest crop. And if you have your broccoli growing and established, by the time the winter months come, you can actually have little broccoli side shoots most of the winter. Okay, I just talked about that. Yeah. So Gailon or Chinese broccoli is another really good broccoli. It grows quickly, and you can have multiple crops. It tastes obviously a little bit like broccoli, and the stems and the leaves are edible. It's a great choice for your fall garden. We talked about cabbage already, and again, cabbages do very well. They take a little bit more space. So if you have a smaller garden, you might want to just do kale, okay? Or do your Gailon or the Dicicchio broccoli. So as you get better, other things that tend to be a little bit fussier in your fall garden, but cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, Savoy cabbage, and tatsoi, those are all other brassica worth trying. The cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi are a little bit more challenging, especially the Brussels sprouts and the cauliflower. I don't plant Brussels sprouts anymore because they're very pest prone. I like my fall garden to be pretty easy, so I keep it to my leaf crops mostly. And I have a few beets, I have a couple of kohlrabi, I have lettuce and spinach and chard and 2 varieties of kale and 1 variety of collards growing. Root crops. So root crops are going to be your carrots, beets, radishes. Now radishes are very fast growing. You can get those in right now, and you can have some lovely radishes probably, you know, in the early December. Your carrots and beets are going to take a little bit longer. They take about 9 weeks to maturity. It's pretty warm right now, and so if you get them in within the next week or so, you could probably have carrots and beets later on in the winter. Okay, so I just pretty much mentioned this. So again, beets, I just want to mention about the beets. Beets, before they mature, they are going to have lovely greens, and those greens are edible. And you can harvest some of those beet greens, not obviously the entire plant, but you can harvest a few of them and eat those while the rest of the beet is maturing. You just want to make sure that you only take 1 or 2 leaves at a time. But beets, like chard, are prone to leaf miners. So I like to grow them under agribon, that floating row color, until the cool weather arrives, which is not that far from now. There are some onion-like alliums that are really, really good candidates for the fall garden. Bunching onions or scallions or green onions are great. They can be grown year round. And this time of year, I would suggest purchasing seedlings already grown and then get them in as soon as possible. You'll plant them 1 to 2 inches apart, and you can harvest them throughout the whole winter. It is not too late to get garlic in. This is actually the right time to plant garlic right now. And if you've never planted garlic, it's actually quite spectacular. So you can buy garlic seed, organic garlic seed. I buy mine from Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, but I'm sure that you can buy it at your local nursery, and you can get varieties that will do well in the area. And follow the directions, and you're just going to put them in little rows about 4 inches apart, cover them up. Don't water them until they actually produce a little green seedling coming up through the top of the soil, and then you can start watering them. Chives is actually an herb, but chives do very, very well for the fall garden, and that's a great addition to your herb garden, because you can have chives all year round and just go out there and, you know, cut a few chives and Put them on your salad, garnish your pasta, do anything. So legumes, the legumes that are good for the fall garden are going to be the peas, sugar snap peas, snow peas, or shelling peas are going to be great. Again, it might be a little bit late right now. You might want to try the snow peas. They don't require a production of a little seed inside the pod, so that might work. And they can be either direct sown or transplanted. Probably this time of year, you might want to go ahead and direct sow them. Most peas are going to require some kind of a trellising, so keep that in mind. It's a little bit late to plant the green beans now, but for next year, you can get a really nice fall crop of green beans. If you plant them in August, and we're harvesting right now in the end of October, our regular green beans. The variety that I like the best is something called Provider. It's a bush bean, and boy, does it grows quickly and it produces abundantly. Fava beans are also great. If you've never eaten fava beans before, they can be quite a treat, and they will actually germinate in very low temperatures. So you can plant those in November, and you'll get beans, but you won't probably get beans until probably January. But fava beans are great. We use fava beans as part of our cover crop strategy. They are great nitrogen fixers. They produce a lovely bean, and they attract all kinds of bees and beneficial insects. If this is your first fall garden and you're not really sure what you want to do right now, planting an herb garden might be the best way to get started. I have herbs planted in my garden all the time. I have them on my deck. I have them in my garden beds, and so I always have some kind of herbs. Herbs are hardy, they're easy to grow, and they're naturally water-wise, so that's great. The annual herbs are going to be a little bit problematic right now, so your Genovese basil, it's a little bit late for that. Parsley you can still grow. Cilantro is going to be a little bit of a problem. It's more of a spring rather than a winter, but certainly your perennials like thyme, sage, rosemary, marjoram, oregano, those are all going to be very hardy. They're great to get started for your winter herb garden. Parsley right now, if you can get parsley, if you can find some from some seedlings, you can get parsley growing, and you'll have parsley all season long. It's not an annual, it's a biennial, so you have a little bit of time. I'm just going to give you the in-bed spacing for a lot of these things that we just talked about in terms of the crops and the days to maturity. And, again, this will be made available to you so that you can kind of get a sense of what the spacing is. Again, I just want to reiterate that the spacing is really important to making sure that you don't waste water. When we plant them according to the in-bed spacing requirements, we actually have plenty of room for the root systems. And then also too, we're going to protect the soil and reduce water usage. Okay, so now's the time for the questions. So do we have any questions?
Please either enter them in the Q&A, or we have a small group here, so you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you. Yeah, please, Loretta's here to answer any questions. So please, I don't see any right now, but
okay. Well, we have a small group, so we'll have some time at the end. And okay, so I think the next part is going to be yes. Okay, so we do have time for the discussion on cover crops, and cover crops are basically anything that is planted purposely, okay, to enhance fertility, preserve the soil structure, okay? So right now, there's a huge movement in regenerative farming or regenerative soil practices that is about planting cover crops. So cover crops, like we said, can be anything from an entire field of rye to an entire field of alfalfa to what we call mixes. Okay, so usually your mixes are going to have some legumes. And so your beans and peas are going to be plants that will nitrogen fix. They literally take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, they put it in their little nodules and they'll fix it into the soil. And then grains. So we're talking about oats and rye, some winter wheats. The grains, you're not really growing them to harvest for bread or anything like that. The thing about the grains is that they actually will grow into the soil and improve the soil structure. Okay, so um, and yeah, like I said, literally grow carbon into the soil. So there's lots of functions of the cover crops. And as we mentioned earlier, if you have a garden right now and you're only going to plant half of it in your fall or winter crops, I would strongly recommend that you try to find some cover crop mix and plant it in the other beds or any of the unused areas of your regular sort of summer vegetable garden. The cover crops are going to protect the soil, and soil protection and water conservation go hand in hand. When we protect our soil, that we keep the soil able to retain and hold water, and then we also protect the soil's ability to stay alive, to maintain the microbial life. So the beneficial bacteria and fungi that are naturally in healthy soil will stay in the soil. Okay, so we don't really want to have soil that is exposed to drying sun, even if it's raining, right? We don't want to have open soil. And cover crops in larger farms is going to be a valuable component to crop rotation practice. So if you grew potatoes in your garden, for instance, definitely plant a cover crop. Potatoes just suck the potassium right out of your soil. So your cover crops are really good for crop rotation. And like I mentioned, it's going to help improve soil structure. And because we're growing carbon and nitrogen into the soil, it's going to help with fertility. Again, we already talked about it's going to help prevent erosion. And even more important, it's going to help suppress invasive weeds. The last thing you want is those horrible things that are stickery and going to blow all over the place. And your cover crop mix will help with that. So what are the cover crops? So fava beans, we mentioned those already. There's a variety of different kinds of peas, biomass peas, Austrian peas, and vetch. So these are all what we call legumes. They're going to help fix nitrogen into the soil, and they too will produce biomass. So what do I mean by biomass? And actual, like, you can harvest it or cut it down at some point and put it in your compost, or you can what we call green manure it if we want to. All right, so those are going to be really beneficial. And the grains, again, the grains are we do oats and rye, cereal rye mostly, because they have a very, very long root system and they literally will grow carbon and sequester carbon. We're talking a lot about carbon sequestration these days. The grains will also help with that. Sometimes you might want to put in a root. A daikon radish is one of the crops that you can grow if you have heavy soil. So for instance, you have soil that you have to break up and you find yourself struggling with it. The daikon radish is very helpful for that. Cover crops will attract beneficial insects. It just can't help it. The cover crop grows up and they start flowering, and you'll just be able to see all different kinds of things hovering around your cover crops. So that's great. It's a great food source for the insects and obviously the birds. And as I mentioned a little while ago, it really has been it is becoming a very, very important component of sustainable and restorative gardening and farming practices. So when to plant your cover crops now. You can plant your cover crops, up like November, up to early November. Most of them are going to germinate in this time, in this temperature here. We still have those 40 to 50 degrees. We're going to need to do a little bit of watering, but as soon as the rains start, right, and as soon as they germinate and become more established, we're going to have to water them less and less. Okay, right. That is very good. Okay, so that is what we have. And now, so if there are questions.
I do see one.
Okay, great.
We have an attendee asking, can you suggest cover crops to plant in my vineyard, which is on a slope? In wintertime, I want to avoid rain washing away the soil.
Yep.
Also don't want to compete with grape plants in growing seasons between spring and summer.
Right. Okay. So I don't know a lot about growing grapes, but in orchards, they plant a cover crop mix. Okay. So I would look for a cover crop, a cool weather cover crop mix. I know we're not in cool weather right now, and you're in Milpitas, so it's hot during the summertime, but you still need a cool weather crop mix, something that's going to germinate. And I would go to Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, and I think it's in our resources list, and we'll show you that. The other thing that you might want to do is add mustard, and it's agricultural mustard. Agricultural mustard is, you see it grown between rows of grapes all the time in grape country, and it's that beautiful yellow kind of a look, not oxalis. Okay, it's agricultural mustard. Agricultural mustard is really good for the grapes because it helps reduce it helps with pest control. And so I sometimes will plant some mustard seed, agricultural mustard, mix it in with my cool weather mix, and then plant it in the beds. So you can plant it in rows, and this is a great way for you to be able to reduce the amount of erosion that you have, because you have erosion on a hill right now. Okay, hang on one second. Sorry about that, you guys. My dog's barking. Okay. So,
oh, sorry.
okay. All right. So does that help with the question about cover crops for the vineyard?
Comment that yes, winter would have erosion.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Get it. Yeah. I would say do your best to get it in as soon as possible. I don't know how many rows you have or how big your area is, but yeah, get it in as soon as you can.
And then a follow-up is where to buy, to look online, or you had some suggestions of places to
Yep.
shop for.
So I'm moving here to okay, this right here, Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. It's groworganic.com. They have all different kinds of cover crops. Okay, so they have a mix, and they have several mixes actually. And what I usually do is I get their cool weather soil builder mix, and then I add for my soil, I add extra rye, cereal rye. I add extra agricultural mustard, and then I also for my long beds that still have a lot of clay in them, I add a little bit of daikon radish. So it depends on your soil type. If you don't have really clay soil, then you probably don't need to put the radish in, but I would definitely get a little bit of the mustard.
Great. Yeah, they are mentioning that they have loose soil. Another question that we have is Sarah's asking that she has a lot of trouble with aphids on brassica, kohlrabi, and collards, and if you have a favorite way to deal with aphids.
Yeah, the aphids. Yes. So my experience with aphids is that the healthier my soil is, the fewer aphids I have. That said, that's kind of like, oh yeah, okay, now what? So work two things. One, you want to work on the health of your soil. So get some really good biologically active compost. Either make it yourself or go to a really reliable place and buy compost. I buy when I have to buy my compost, I buy compost from Lingso. It's in San Carlos though. So, but I'm sure that there's some really good places where you can get biologically active compost. The other thing is for your brassica and that get the aphids, I don't like to use sprays, but the first thing I try is I get my regular hose, all right, with my whatchamacallit on it, all right, and my nozzle, and I try to spray the aphids off. You just scare them away. And I realize that wastes a little bit of water. I'm sorry, Linda, but you can get rid of them. And then the other thing is there are insecticidal soaps that you can use that are very that are very good, and they're still considered to be organic, and they're not toxic to your children or your animals, that you can get and apply a little bit there. In the worst case scenario, the worst thing that I've ever used is a neem oil spray. Neem oil spray is still considered an organic a spray, and but I try to minimize using that. So those are the three. So actually, the four things that long term you want to make sure that your plants are healthy, and make sure that your soil is healthy, and then you have your just spray them with the water. Then you have your insecticidal soaps, and then you have your neem oil.
Great. I would say that yes, I believe it is definitely safe to use city compost for vegetable gardens.
Great, good, great.
It's a question.
Oh, okay.
Which I think definitely you can utilize our compost. Since we do compost giveaways at least once a year.
Oh, great. Oh, awesome. Excellent.
Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand and ask Loretta directly. I can unmute you. Oh, we got another question from Sarah. Sarah was saying that healthier plants is an interesting solution and that she's used water and neem before.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, sometimes, because I run and manage a community run garden. And so it's an all volunteer organization. And sometimes we get the seedlings, we grow them up in the greenhouse, they look beautiful, but we don't get them in time. And sometimes the plants get a little bit too mature in the little flat, and they're a little bit like long in the tooth, as we like to say, before we get them planted in. And so they're not as healthy, and those are the ones that we usually run into problems with. So that's one of the factors when we're talking about, especially with the brassica, when the brassica when you start getting the aphids and that kind of thing. So again, it's the healthy plant. So if you're purchasing from a nursery, for your brassica, really look for the healthy plants, and the stems should not be bent. The brassica plants, so broccoli and kale and cabbage, they have the stem tends to bend. And so when it tends to bend, that is not a good sign for the health of that plant. And so sometimes I plant them anyway. I'm just going, okay, fine. But I find that those are the plants that sometimes become susceptible to to aphids and other pests as well.
Great.
Do you have any questions?
Still have time for more questions. Feel free
Oh,
to put them in the Q&A box or raise your hand.
okay. So if I'll just talk until there's a question. I know it sounds crazy, but on that same vein of what do I do about aphids and that kind of thing, one thing that you can do is plant herbs and other flowering plants like wildflowers that will often attract other things that are going to try to keep aphids away. Now, what does that mean? So natives as well. Yarrow is a good one because it attracts a hoverfly that eats aphids. So the more diverse type of plants that you have in your garden, the more likely that there's going to be a beneficial insect that can help keep these pests under control, and aphids would be one of them. So that might be an idea as well. Yarrow is my favorite thing to plant in the community garden because it's a native. It grows really well. It's also very water efficient, and it produces this lovely little white flower that helps that attracts all kinds of different beneficial insects. So that might be a good strategy as well.
Great.
Any other questions?
I do not see questions, but I'll give you guys another couple minutes. If,
Okay.
please ask your questions.
Oops.
Yes, while we wait, Loretta, what would you say the first step if someone's the kind of first starting gardening? What would you say that the first thing they should do?
If you're first starting to garden, the first thing is looking for the location. I kind of flew by location today because most of the time people are starting a fall garden already are gardening. But if you're a first time gardener, start small. And I really can't overemphasize that because I didn't in the past, and I end up really becoming overwhelmed. So find a really good place, a southwest facing area in your yard or in your garden area, and look for either if you want to dig into your soil directly or if you want to do raised beds, but keep the size down. So I would say, 4x4s would be great. That way you'll be able to reach across, make sure that you have some path space. You don't want to not be able to get through or between your beds, even if you're digging them in the bed, right in the ground. You want to make sure that you can walk between the beds. You don't want to walk on the soil that you're improving. Okay, so that's the other thing that you want to do is you want to learn how to improve your soil. The best way to improve your soil is my two favorite things is compost and cover crops. So the cover crops can be turned into, if you're just starting right now and you're like, yeah, I'm not really sure what I want to grow, but I have this great area, maybe get a pound of cover crop mix, start growing it. That will help that garden area improve the soil. It will help reduce the soil erosion. And then probably in like January or February, you can cut it down, and you can cut it down and just leave it there and let it compost in place. Or you can cut it and then put it in your regular composting. The other thing, speaking of composting, if I was just beginning to learn how to garden, I would learn how to compost. Most cities and counties have composting programs where you can learn how to compost. Composting is a great way to reduce the waste stream. And when we reduce the waste stream, we also save water as well. So if you figure out a way to, you know, find a small area in your yard where you can put a biostat composter or a rolling composter, there's lots of different ways to build composters, or even a worm bin, and start learning how to take your green waste from your house and turn it into a very, very valuable resource for your garden.
We do have a follow-up compost question.
Yes.
Sarah said the compost that she gets from Sunnyvale seems to be nitrogen poor and still have some bits of wood that are not decomposed, and wanted to know how you suggest to kind of supplement that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So that so sometimes that happens because when they process the compost, they have to heat it up, and so sometimes like we said, you know, and we don't really know, you know, what specifically is in there. So you can supplement it with a number of things. You can supplement it with there are some like let me see, the company that I'm thinking of, there are a couple of places, a couple of bagged soil builder things that you can add to it. You can also add, I'm just trying to think of what, oh shoot, it just, Gardeners in Bloom, there you go. Whew. Gardeners in Bloom makes a supplement, a soil supplement that is a lot of compost, but it also has quite a bit of nitrogen in it as well. You can also add alfalfa meal. Alfalfa meal is almost all nitrogen. So that might be a way to mix some high nitrogen product with maybe a little bit of a nitrogen poor compost. That helps.
Great. Another compost question is, do you have a suggestion on a fast way to compost chicken manure?
Oh, a fast way. Chicken manure is, so if you have chicken manure, I would, you can probably get it composted in about 2 or 3 months. You don't, as you probably are guessing, I'm guessing that's why the question came up, but chicken manure, new chicken manure is going to be very hot, and it will burn your plants. So you should put it through a composting, put it through your composting system. What I do is I mix it with my regular compost. So I have my corn stalks and my leaves and then my kitchen scraps, and then I mix in the chicken manure with that. And then if you turn your compost 2 or 3 times within that 2 to 3 months, you should probably have pretty good compost. But it's going to take a little bit. Does that help?
Yes. Yes, we have a response. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? We do have a thank you for all the great advice. I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes. If you guys have any other questions, like I said, we can unmute you if you want to talk to Loretta directly.
Yeah. So I should have done this. I took this out because I thought that we weren't going to have time. Okay. So for the composters, the composting questions, I highly recommend this book. There's actually a couple of them, different covers or whatever. It's called Teeming with Microbes, and it's written by Jeff Lowenfels. And in this book, he goes over the importance of creating really good compost for to maintain your what they call the soil food web. So it's the living component of your soil. So your soil is, silt, sand, or clay, and then it has some organic matter in it, and then it's going to have pore space, and it's going to hopefully have a little bit of water, and then it's going to have the microbes. Maintaining the microbes is really important to your soil health. So when we're talking about really good soil health, with the soil health, then it's going to have healthy plants. And in this book, he talks about exactly how to make really good compost. So I would highly recommend this if you're going to start. If you've not ever made compost before, this is a good book to read, or at least the part about how to make the compost. It's a really good book in general.
Great. And I guess I would just do one last note on compost is we do offer free composting 101 workshops. So definitely check our website. And if you are signed up for our sustainability newsletter, that is a great way to get information on when those will be as well. I do not see any other questions, and we are at 8:05. So if we don't have any other questions, I will just say thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Loretta, for the great presentation. As I mentioned, this webinar is recorded and will be posted on the website, and we really hope to see you at upcoming classes, and thanks for trying to save water, everyone.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everybody. Have a great winter.
Thank you.